On the morning of March 4th, 1944, Lieutenant Robert Johnson sits in the cramped cockpit of his P-51 Mustang on a frozen airfield in England. His breath fogs in the sub-zero air. Through the plexiglass canopy, he watches hundreds of B-17 flying fortresses lumber into formation overhead, their contrails cutting white scars across the grey sky. The bombers are heading to Berlin, the heart of Nazi Germany, 677 miles deep into enemy territory. Johnson's hands grip the control stick. His squadron has been given orders that seem impossible. Escort the bombers all the way to the target and back. No American fighter has ever reached Berlin. The distance is too far, the fuel requirements too demanding, and waiting for them are thousands of German fighters, Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs, piloted by veterans who've been bleeding American bombers from the sky for 2 years. A voice crackles through his headset. "Mustangs, start your engines." Johnson toggles the ignition. The Rolls-Royce Merlin engine roars to life. The propeller blur becomes invisible. Around him, 59 other P-51s thunder awake. The German pilots don't know it yet, but everything is about to change. Let's rewind to understand why March 4th, 1944 matters so much. Throughout 1942 and 1943, the United States Army Air Forces are committed to a brutal strategy: daylight precision bombing of Nazi Germany. The theory is simple. American bombers, flying in tight defensive formations and bristling with .50 caliber machine guns, will blast their way to targets deep in Germany, destroy critical industrial facilities, and return home. The British prefer night bombing, scattering their attacks across wide areas. The Americans believe they can do better with daylight raids, hitting specific factories, oil refineries, and ball-bearing plants. There's just one catastrophic problem. They're wrong. German fighter pilots are shredding the American bomber formations. The Luftwaffe has developed sophisticated tactics specifically designed to massacre B-17 and B-24 Liberators. They've learned that head-on attacks work best, diving straight at the bomber's nose, where defensive armament is weakest, firing 20mm and 30mm cannons that can tear a bomber apart in seconds, then rolling away before the return fire can track them. The numbers tell a horrifying story. On August 17, 1943, the 8th Air Force launches a massive raid against ball-bearing factories in Schweinfurt and an aircraft plant in Regensburg. Of 376 bombers dispatched, 60 are shot down, a 16% loss rate. Another 168 return with battle damage. Nearly 600 American airmen are killed or captured in a single day. 2 months later, on October 14th, 1943, they try Schweinfurt again. This time, it's worse. Of 291 bombers attacking the target, 77 are destroyed. Another 121 are damaged. The crews call it Black Thursday. The 8th Air Force loses so many bombers and trained air crews that deep penetration raids into Germany are temporarily suspended. They simply can't sustain the losses. General Ira Eaker, commander of the 8th Air Force, writes a desperate assessment. The enemy has developed air strength and tactics which, for the present, are successfully preventing daylight penetration to targets in certain vital areas of Germany. The German pilots are winning, and they know it. To understand the crisis, you need to understand the tactical reality of 1943. American heavy bombers, B-17 and B-24s, fly in combat box formations, staggered groups of aircraft positioned so their overlapping fields of fire create a defensive envelope. Each B-17 carries 10.50 caliber machine guns manned by gunners stationed throughout the aircraft. In theory, attacking fighters face a wall of lead, but German fighter pilots have figured out the weak points. Luftwaffe aces like Egon Meyer and Georg Peter Eder pioneer the head-on attack. Coming straight at the bomber's nose, they present a small, fast-moving target that's hard to hit. The B-17's front-firing armament, just 2 guns in the nose, can't generate enough defensive fire. The German pilots fire their cannons at ranges of 600 to 800 yards, then break away before passing through the bomber formation. A single well-placed 20mm cannon round can kill the pilots, destroy an engine, or ignite fuel tanks. Even more devastating are attacks from above and behind, the 6 o'clock high position that bomber gunners struggle to defend against. German pilots using the Rotor, 2-plane element, and Schwarm, 4-plane finger 4, formations coordinate their attacks, with one pair drawing defensive fire while another strikes from a different angle. The Luftwaffe also develops specialized bomber destroyers. The FW1908-6/R2 carries 4 20mm cannons. The Bf-110 heavy fighter mounts 30mm Mk-108 cannons that fire explosive shells. 3 hits will down a B-17. Some Me-410S carry the massive 50mm BK-5 cannon, essentially a tank gun mounted in a fighter. They attack from outside effective machine gun range, blasting bombers apart before the gunners can fight back. But here's the critical factor. American escort fighters can't reach the deep targets. The P-47 Thunderbolt, the primary American escort fighter in 1943, has an effective combat radius of about 230 miles. The P-38 Lightning can manage 350 miles with drop tanks. But targets like Schweinfurt, Regensburg and Berlin lie 400 to 600 miles from English airfields. For most of the mission, the deepest, most dangerous portions, the bombers fly alone. German fighter controllers watch the raids on radar. They track when the American escorts turn back at the limit of their range. Then they pounce. Luftwaffe pilots call this period Die Glückliche Zeit, the happy time. They're racking up kill counts that would have been unthinkable on the Eastern Front or over Britain. Oberleutnant Heinz Baer shoots down 17 American heavy bombers between April and December 1943. Major Walter Oso destroys 20 bombers in 7 months. These are enormous, slow targets flying in predictable formations, and for several hours each mission, they have no fighter protection. From the German perspective, the American bombing campaign looks doomed. The math is simple. At current loss rates, the 8th Air Force will destroy itself before it significantly damages German war production. They're celebrating their dominance. They have no idea what's coming. The North American P-51 Mustang arrives in the European theatre in late 1943, and at first nobody thinks it's going to change the war. The Mustang's origin story is unusual. In 1940, the British Purchasing Commission approaches North American Aviation with a request: build P-40 Warhawks under license for the Royal Air Force. North American's chief designer, Edgar Schmood, makes a counter-proposal. Give us 120 days and we'll design you something better. He delivers. The NA-73X prototype flies in October 1940 just 102 days after the contract signing. It's a beautiful aircraft, sleek, aerodynamic, with laminar flow wings that minimize drag. The British love it and order it into production as the Mustang Mark I. But there's a problem. The Allison V1710 engine. Below 15,000 feet, the early Mustangs are fast and maneuverable. Above that altitude, performance falls off dramatically. Since bombers and fighters operate at 20,000 to 30,000 feet, this makes the early Mustang unsuitable as an escort fighter. The RAF uses them for low-altitude ground attack and reconnaissance. Then, in 1942, a Rolls-Royce test pilot named Ronnie Harker flies a Mustang at Duxford and has an epiphany. The airframe is superb. The engine is the limitation. What if they replaced the Allison with the Rolls-Royce Merlin, the same engine powering the legendary Spitfire? The British install a Merlin 61 engine in a Mustang Mark I. The results are extraordinary. The Mustang's performance explodes. Top speed jumps from 390 miles per hour to 441 miles per hour. Service ceiling increases from 31,000 feet to 42,000 feet. Most critically, high-altitude performance becomes phenomenal. The aircraft can now dominate at bomber escort altitudes. In the United States, the same conversion happens using the Packard Phi 1650, an American-built version of the Merlin. The result is the P-51 Mustang, which enters production in mid-1943. But speed and altitude performance aren't the Mustang's revolutionary characteristics. Lots of fighters are fast. What makes the P-51 different, what makes it a war-winning weapon, is range. The Mustang is extraordinarily fuel efficient. Its laminar flow wing creates minimal drag. The Merlin engine, with its two-stage supercharger, delivers power efficiently at high altitude. Combined with internal fuel capacity of 269 gallons, and the ability to carry two 75-gallon or later 110-gallon drop tanks, the P-51B has a combat radius of 650 miles, more than double the P-47's range. Do the math. Berlin is 585 miles from airfields in England. For the first time, American fighters can escort bombers all the way to the German capital and back. The Germans don't understand this yet. They've monitored American fighter development, and they know about the Mustang, but they assume it's just another short-range escort like the Thunderbolt and Lightning. Their intelligence estimates miss the significance of the Merlin engine conversion. They don't grasp that the rules of engagement are about to fundamentally change. In December 1943, the first P-51 B groups become operational with the 8th Air Force. The 354th Fighter Group, attached to the 9th Air Force, begins flying bomber escort missions. Then, the 8th Air Force's own groups start converting from P-47s to P-51s. By March 1944, enough Mustang groups are operational to attempt something previously impossible: escorting bombers all the way to Berlin. The mission is scheduled for March 4th, 1944. Before we get to Berlin, we need to understand the week that changes everything. From February 20th to 25th, 1944, the 8th Air Force and RAF Bomber Command launch Operation Argument, later nicknamed Big Week by the press. The strategy is aggressive and risky. Attack the German aircraft industry across multiple cities simultaneously, forcing the Luftwaffe to commit its fighters to defense. Then destroy those fighters in air-to-air combat. This is a fundamental shift in American doctrine. Previously, the primary goal was bombing accuracy, getting bombs on target facilities. Now, the goal is fighter attrition. The bombers are bait. The real objective is drawing up German fighters so American escorts can shoot them down. It's a brutal calculation, but the math favors the Americans. The United States is producing fighters and training pilots far faster than Germany. If they can force sustained air battles, trading losses at even or favorable rates, the Luftwaffe will eventually collapse from attrition. But to make this work, American fighters need to be where the German fighters are, over the targets, deep in Germany. This is where the Mustang's range becomes decisive. During Big Week, American forces fly more than 3,000 bomber sorties and 3,673 fighter sorties against German aviation plants in Leipzig, Brunswick, Regensburg, Augsburg, Stuttgart, and other cities. The weather is finally clear enough for visual bombing after months of overcast skies. The 8th Air Force drops nearly 10,000 tons of bombs. Significant damage is inflicted on Messerschmitt, Junkers and Heinkel production facilities. But the bombing damage isn't the decisive factor. The air battles are. American fighters claim 528 German aircraft destroyed. The Luftwaffe loses 355 fighters confirmed in combat, with another 100 damaged beyond immediate repair. More critically, they lose 100 pilots killed or missing, experienced fighter pilots who can't be easily replaced. The German defenders fight ferociously. On February 20th, Leipzig's defenders include some of the Luftwaffe's best: JG-11, JG-26, JG-2. They down 21 American bombers. But American fighter groups, increasingly equipped with P-51s, are ranging deeper and engaging more aggressively. The escorts don't just defend the bombers, they hunt. One pilot, Colonel Hub Zemke of the 56th Fighter Group, still flying P-47s, later describes the new tactics. We had the altitude, we had the numbers, and now with the 50s, we had the range. It was time to stop waiting for them to attack the bombers. It was time to go find them and kill them. By the end of Big Week, the Luftwaffe is reeling but not broken. They've proven they can still mass fighters and inflict painful losses. 48 American bombers are shot down on February 22nd alone. But for the first time, they're facing American fighters in significant numbers throughout the entire mission profile. German fighter pilots notice something unsettling. The American escorts aren't turning back. They're staying with the bombers deeper than ever before. And these new fighters, the ones with the checkered noses and bubble canopies, are fast, maneuverable, and apparently have unlimited fuel. One German pilot, Oberleutnant Heinz Knoke of JG-11, writes in his diary after an engagement with P-51s, "These new American fighters are dangerous. They follow us down to the deck. They follow us through clouds. They wait for us at our airfields. Where is the fuel coming from?" The Germans still don't fully understand what they're facing. Berlin is about to teach them. In early March 1944, Lieutenant General James Doolittle, commander of the 8th Air Force, studies weather forecasts and fighter availability. He's been waiting for the right conditions to strike Berlin, the symbolic heart of Nazi Germany, the target Hitler has vowed to defend at all costs. Berlin has been bombed before, but only by the RAF at night. No American bombers have reached the city in daylight. The 1,100 to 70-mile round trip is at the extreme edge of what's possible. Losses are expected to be catastrophic, but Doolittle has a new hand to play: Mustangs. By early March, he has multiple P-51 groups operational, including the 4th, 354th, and 363rd Fighter Groups. Combined with longer-range P-47s, carrying improved drop tanks, and P-38 Lightnings, he can provide continuous escort for the entire mission. For the first time, the bombers won't face that terrifying period of isolation deep over Germany. The plan calls for more than 800 heavy bombers, B-17 and B-24, escorted by over 600 fighters. The primary targets are VKF ball-bearing plant at Erkner, the Daimler-Benz aero engine factory, and other industrial facilities in the Berlin area. But everyone understands the real purpose. This is a statement mission. Reaching Berlin tells the Germans that nowhere is safe. It tells the world that American air power can strike the enemy capital at will. It also tells the Luftwaffe that the rules have changed. The mission is scheduled for March 4th, 1944, weather permitting. The bombers start engines at bases across East Anglia at 0730 hours. It's cold, below freezing at altitude, and crews bundle in sheepskin jackets and heated suits. Waist gunners and ball turret gunners will spend 8 to 9 hours in these temperatures. Lieutenant Robert Johnson's 61st Fighter Squadron, part of the 56th Fighter Group, is assigned penetration escort. They'll accompany the bombers during the initial leg into Germany. Johnson's squadron is flying P-47 Thunderbolts with 150-gallon drop tanks, pushing the big fighters to their maximum range. They'll hand off to P-51 groups for the deepest penetration. By 900, the bomber stream's assembled, a massive aerial armada stretching for miles. The formations climb through cloud layers, emerging into brilliant sunshine at 23,000 feet. Contrails stream behind each aircraft, marking their path across the sky like white arrows pointing toward Berlin. The fighters join up at assigned rendezvous points. The coordination is complex. Multiple fighter groups need to arrive at specific times and locations to provide continuous coverage. P-38 Lightnings from the 20th Fighter Group fly target support. P-47 groups take initial escort, and the P-51s, the 4th Fighter Group, the 354th, the 363rd, are assigned the deepest penetration, Berlin itself. As the formation crosses the Dutch coast, German radar stations detect them immediately. At Luftwaffe fighter control centers across Germany, controllers scramble fighters. They can see this is a major raid, probably headed for central Germany, but they still don't know the target. The bomber stream continues southeast, then turns east toward Berlin. That's when the German controllers realize what's happening. Achtung! Die Amis fliegen nach Berlin. The Americans are flying to Berlin. Across northern and central Germany, every available fighter is scrambled. JG-1, JG-3, JG-11, JG-26, JG-27. The Jagdgeschwader, fighter wings, that have been bleeding American bombers for 2 years. The pilots run to their aircraft with confidence. They've done this before. The Americans have tried deep penetration raids before. The escorts always turn back eventually, and then the slaughter begins. They climb toward the bomber stream, throttles firewall, oxygen masks fogging. They're expecting to catch the bombers alone, as always. Hauptmann Johannes Naumann of JG-26 leads his Staffel squadron east, climbing through 20,000 feet. His FW-190 feels solid and responsive. He's been flying combat missions since 1941, with 34 confirmed victories, most of them American bombers. This should be another successful mission. Through his canopy, he spots the bomber stream at 24,000 feet. Dozens of B-17s in their distinctive combat boxes, contrails streaming. His wingman calls them out on the radio. Naumann checks his fuel, his ammunition counters. Everything is ready. He begins maneuvering into position for a head-on attack, his preferred tactic. That's when he sees them. Fighters. American fighters, high above the bombers, weaving back and forth in defensive patrol patterns. That's not unusual. There are always some escorts. But these fighters are over central Germany, 400 miles from England. They should have turned back an hour ago. Naumann counts aircraft. More than he expected. And the silhouettes are wrong. Not the chunky P-47s or the twin-boomed P-38s. These are sleeker, with inline engines and bubble canopies. P-51 Mustangs, deep over Germany. Hundreds of miles beyond where American fighters are supposed to be. For the first time, Naumann feels uncertainty. His tactical calculation, how long before escorts turn back, how long the bombers are vulnerable, no longer works. The equation has changed. He presses the attack anyway. He's a Luftwaffe fighter pilot. This is his job. As he rolls into his attack run, two Mustangs dive from above, slashing toward him at impossible speed. Naumann brakes hard, abandoning his bomber attack to evade the fighters. His wingman calls a warning. More Mustangs, coming from 10 o'clock high. They're everywhere, and they're not leaving. At 11:17 hours, the lead bomber groups reach Berlin. Through breaks in scattered clouds, crews see the city spread below. The Spree River, the Tiergarten, the government district. Flak batteries open fire, filling the sky with black bursts of explosive shells. Bombers jink and weave, trying to maintain formation while avoiding the worst concentrations. Colonel Donald Blakesley, commanding the 4th Fighter Group's Mustangs, watches the bombers begin their runs. His pilots are spread out in a defensive screen, stepping down from 27,000 feet to 20,000 feet, covering all approach vectors. They've been flying for 3.5 hours. The internal fuel is running low, but the drop tanks gave them the range they needed. Over the radio calls multiply. Bandits, 12 o'clock level, FW-190S at 4 o'clock high. I've got 2 Me-1 09s on that straggler. The Mustangs engage. Captain Don Gentile, one of Blakesley's aces, spots a formation of BF-109s positioning for a bomber attack. He advances throttles, the Merlin engine's supercharger kicking in with a rising howl. The Mustang accelerates smoothly. One advantage over the FW-190, which is faster in level flight but can't accelerate as quickly. Gentile closes to 300 yards, leads the trailing 109 and squeezes the trigger. 6.50 caliber machine guns converge fire. Tracers arc out, every 5th round, marking the stream. The 109's tail section tears apart, pieces tumbling away. The German fighter flips onto its back and enters a death spiral, smoke trailing. Gentile doesn't watch it fall. He's already looking for the next threat. Across the sky over Berlin, similar engagements multiply. German pilots try to reach the bombers, but the Mustangs are there, intercepting, forcing the Germans into defensive maneuvering. When Luftwaffe fighters do break through the escort screen, they have only seconds before Mustangs, chase them down. The Germans are learning a terrible lesson. The Mustang is not just a long-range fighter, it's also superior in performance. At altitude, the P-51B is faster than the Bf-109G and comparable to the FW-190. It turns better than the 190, though not quite as well as the 109. It dives faster than anything the Germans have. And in a sustained chase, the Merlin engine's efficiency means the Mustang can follow German fighters all the way down to the deck, pursuing them across Germany as they desperately try to escape. There's nowhere to run anymore. Lieutenant Colonel James Howard of the 354th Fighter Group, flying alone after being separated from his formation, engages a group of over 30 German fighters attacking a bomber formation. For more than 30 minutes, Howard dives in repeatedly, breaking up attacks, drawing fire, giving the bombers time to defend themselves. He shoots down at least 4 aircraft confirmed, possibly 6. He'll later receive the Medal of Honor, the only fighter pilot in Europe to earn it during a bomber escort mission. In his P-51, Howard becomes a one-man wrecking crew, demonstrating what the new fighter can do in the hands of an aggressive pilot. German fighter pilots try to engage him, try to coordinate attacks, but Howard's Mustang is too fast, too maneuverable, and he's too skilled. He dominates the fight. The bombers complete their runs, dropping 1,626 tons of bombs on Berlin targets. Damage to the Erkner ball-bearing plant is significant. The Genshagen Daimler-Benz plant is hit. Other industrial facilities are damaged, but the bombing results are almost secondary. What matters is what happened in the air. As the bomber formations turn west, beginning the long flight back to England, German fighter units attempt to organize follow-up attacks. This is when, historically, the Americans are most vulnerable. Formation discipline loosens, damaged bombers fall behind, and escort fighters have usually departed. Not today. The Mustangs stay with the bombers. P-51 groups leapfrog coverage, with fresh squadrons arriving, as others peel off to return to England. The Germans keep trying to organize mass attacks, but they can't get into position without being intercepted. Oberleutnant Heinz Knoke of JG-11, diving toward a straggling B-17, suddenly has 2 Mustangs on his tail. He pushes into a dive, the G-forces crushing him into his seat. The 109 accelerates past 450 miles per hour. He looks back. The Mustangs are still there, closing. He pulls hard, trying a vertical maneuver, but his engine cuts out momentarily. The Bf-109's carburetor doesn't handle negative G maneuvers well. The Mustang's fuel-injected Merlins don't miss a beat. Knoke barely escapes, diving to ground level and racing across the countryside at treetop height. The Mustangs pursue him for 20 miles before finally breaking off. He lands at his base with bullet holes in his wings, his fuel tanks nearly empty, and his hands shaking. In his diary that night, he'll write, "The American fighters are flying with the bombers all the way to Berlin and back. This changes everything. Our tactics are obsolete. Where are our reinforcements? Where is the fuel? How do we fight this? The bomber stream continues west. Fighters continue to engage German interceptors all the way across Germany, Holland, and out over the North Sea. The escort doesn't end until the bombers are safely over England. Of the 814 heavy bombers dispatched, 69 are shot down, an 8.5% loss rate. It's painful, but it's survivable. More importantly, it's lower than previous deep penetration missions, despite hitting the most heavily defended target in Germany. The Americans claim 179 German aircraft destroyed. Actual German losses are around 66 fighters, with another 20 to 30 damaged. Overclaiming is typical in the chaos of combat. Multiple pilots often shoot at the same target, and aircraft seen smoking or diving are claimed as destroyed when they sometimes make it home. But the real numbers are bad enough for the Luftwaffe. The Germans have lost 66 fighters defending their capital. They've failed to stop the raid. And they've discovered that American escorts can now reach Berlin. For 2 years, the Luftwaffe has told the German people that Berlin is safe, that American bombers will never reach the city in daylight. On March 4th, 1944, that promise is proven hollow. The psychological impact is devastating. March 6th, 1944. The 8th Air Force hits Berlin again. Over 700 bombers with 800 plus fighters. This time losses are heavier, 69 bombers shot down. But the Americans prove the previous raid wasn't a fluke. They can sustain operations against Berlin. March 8th, another Berlin raid. 579 bombers, 700 plus fighters. The Luftwaffe throws everything available into the defense. Brutal air battles rage across central Germany. 37 bombers are lost, but American fighters claim 156 German aircraft. Actual losses around 87, still crippling. The 3 Berlin raids in 5 days, later called Big Week Part 2, cost the Americans 175 heavy bombers and 28 fighters. It's a bloodbath by any measure, but they're replacing the losses within weeks. The Luftwaffe, meanwhile, has lost over 200 fighters and, more critically, nearly 150 pilots. Germany's fighter force is being ground down. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, rages at his subordinates. "Why can't you stop them? Where are my fighters? How are the Americans doing this?" General Lieutenant Adolf Galland, commander of Luftwaffe fighters, tries to explain the tactical situation. The Americans have numerical superiority. Their escorts have the range to stay with the bombers, and the Mustang is a superior aircraft to what Germany is currently fielding. Göring doesn't want to hear it. He blames the pilots, accuses them of cowardice, demands more aggressive attacks. The disconnect between leadership and reality deepens. German fighter production actually increases in 1944. They're building more Bf-109s and FW-190s than ever before. But they're losing pilots faster than they can train replacements, and fuel shortages limit training hours for new pilots. A Luftwaffe fighter pilot in early 1944 might have 112 hours of flight training before going operational. An American P-51 pilot typically has 300 plus hours, including substantial gunnery training and instrument flying. The quality gap compounds the numerical disadvantage. March 6th, 1944. The 8th Air Force hits Berlin again. Over 700 bombers with 800 plus fighters. This time losses are heavier, 69 bombers shot down. But the Americans prove the previous raid wasn't a fluke. They can sustain operations against Berlin. March 8th, another Berlin raid. 579 bombers, 700 plus fighters. The Luftwaffe throws everything available into the defense. Brutal air battles rage across central Germany. 37 bombers are lost, but American fighters claim 156 German aircraft. Actual losses around 87, still crippling. The 3 Berlin raids in 5 days, later called Big Week Part 2, cost the Americans 175 heavy bombers and 28 fighters. It's a bloodbath by any measure, but they're replacing the losses within weeks. The Luftwaffe, meanwhile, has lost over 200 fighters and, more critically, nearly 150 pilots. Germany's fighter force is being ground down. Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, rages at his subordinates. "Why can't you stop them? Where are my fighters? How are the Americans doing this?" General Lieutenant Adolf Galland, commander of Luftwaffe fighters, tries to explain the tactical situation. The Americans have numerical superiority. Their escorts have the range to stay with the bombers, and the Mustang is a superior aircraft to what Germany is currently fielding. Göring doesn't want to hear it. He blames the pilots, accuses them of cowardice, demands more aggressive attacks. The disconnect between leadership and reality deepens. German fighter production actually increases in 1944. They're building more Bf-109s and FW-190s than ever before. But they're losing pilots faster than they can train replacements, and fuel shortages limit training hours for new pilots. A Luftwaffe fighter pilot in early 1944 might have 112 hours of flight training before going operational. An American P-51 pilot typically has 300 plus hours, including substantial gunnery training and instrument flying. The quality gap compounds the numerical disadvantage. Through spring and summer 1944, Mustang groups proliferate. The 357th Fighter Group arrives, the 359th, the 352nd. By June, the 8th Air Force has 14 fighter groups operational, with most flying P-51s. The tactical doctrine evolves. Early in the war, escort fighters stayed close to the bombers, directly defending them from attack. The new doctrine, pushed aggressively by commanders like Don Blakesley and Hub Zemke, is more aggressive. Position fighters at altitude above and ahead of the bombers sweep the route clear of German fighters and actively hunt any Luftwaffe aircraft that attempt to approach. Some groups go further. They begin freelancing, sweeping ahead of the bombers, looking for German fighters on the ground at their airfields. P-51 Luftwaffe bases, catching German fighters during takeoff and landing, the most vulnerable moments. They destroy aircraft parked on airfields, shoot up control towers, and turn what should be safe rear areas into combat zones. The Germans call it Jagdfrei, free hunting. Their own term from when Luftwaffe fighters roamed freely over Europe now applies to their enemies. Lieutenant Colonel John Meyer of the 352nd Fighter Group becomes notorious for leading his squadron down to attack German airfields. On a mission in September 1944, Meyer spots a German training field with dozens of fighters parked in neat rows. He leads his flight down through flak, strafing repeatedly. The Mustangs destroy 25 aircraft on the ground in less than 5 minutes. This isn't in the script. Fighter escort isn't supposed to include ground attack on enemy airfields, but Meyer understands the strategic calculus. Every German fighter destroyed on the ground is one that won't attack bombers, and ground kills come without the risk of air combat. The tactic spreads. Soon, P-51 groups routinely strafed targets of opportunity during escort missions. Airfields, trains, trucks, anything that supports the German war effort. The Luftwaffe's response capability degenerates. They start dispersing aircraft, hiding them in forests, using grass strips instead of proper airfields. But this degrades operational efficiency. Maintenance becomes harder. Pilots spend more time getting to their aircraft. Coordinated mass formations become difficult to organize. By summer 1944, the Luftwaffe is reacting, not initiating. They're forced into a defensive crouch while American bombers roam across Germany, hitting targets systematically. So let's return to where we started. March 4th, 1944, the first daylight raid on Berlin. In the broader context of World War II, this is one mission among thousands. The bombs dropped on Berlin that day don't win the war. The tonnage isn't exceptional. The industrial damage, while significant, isn't decisive by itself. But the mission's symbolic and psychological impact is enormous. For the Germans, it's the moment they realize the Allies can strike anywhere, anytime, with impunity. Berlin, the capital, the seat of Nazi power, the city Hitler promised would never be bombed, is now a regular target. The invincibility of the Reich is revealed as myth. For the Americans, it's validation. The strategic bombing doctrine, which has been criticized and questioned for 2 years, suddenly works. The losses are sustainable. The targets are being hit. The concept of daylight precision bombing, protected by long-range escorts, is proven viable. For the Luftwaffe, it's a turning point. They'll continue fighting for another 14 months, but the trajectory is set. They're in a war of attrition they cannot win, against an enemy with superior numbers, better logistics, and now aircraft that can fight anywhere over Europe. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, who we met in the opening, lands back in England after that mission. His Mustang is undamaged. He's alive. He's flown to Berlin and back, something that seemed impossible 6 months earlier. In debriefing, an intelligence officer asks, "How was it?" Johnson thinks for a moment. He's seen bombers shot down. He's engaged German fighters. He's flown the longest combat mission of his life. Finally, he says, "We reached Berlin. That's what matters. We can do this now. We can go anywhere." And they could. On that frozen morning in March 1944, when P-51 Mustangs escorted American bombers all the way to Berlin for the first time, the air war over Europe fundamentally changed. German pilots who had laughed at unescorted American bombers, who had massacred B-17 formations during that vulnerable period when fighters turned back, suddenly faced a new reality. The escorts didn't turn back anymore. The Americans could reach anywhere, and they came with fighters that could match or exceed German performance while flying impossible distances. The strategic bombing campaign, which had been failing due to unsustainable losses, suddenly became effective. Oil refineries were systematically destroyed. Aircraft factories were bombed into rubble. Transportation networks were shattered. Not because the bombs were different, but because the bombers could now reach their targets and bomb accurately under fighter protection. The Luftwaffe, which had been a formidable defensive force, was ground down through attrition it couldn't replace. Every fight over Berlin, every engagement over synthetic oil plants, every strafed airfield eroded German fighter strength. By D-Day, Allied air superiority was so complete that German forces in France operated under constant air attack, while their own air force was nearly absent. How many lives were saved because the war ended months earlier than it might have? How much suffering was prevented because strategic bombing degraded German industrial capacity? These questions are impossible to answer precisely, but the magnitude is real. The P-51 Mustang, designed in 102 days, powered by a British engine, mass-produced by American industry, became one of World War II's decisive weapons. Not because it was perfect, but because it solved the right problem at the right time. Those German pilots who laughed at unescorted bombers learned a harsh lesson. Technology and tactics evolve. Today's advantage becomes tomorrow's obsolescence. Air superiority is temporary, hard-won, and easily lost. The American pilots who flew Mustangs to Berlin and back wrote a new chapter in air warfare. They proved that range, persistence, and quality can overcome numerical advantages. They established doctrines that shaped jet-age air combat. And they won. The 8th Air Force would eventually fly over 10,000 bombers and fighters on single missions, formations so large they blackened the sky. Germany's industrial capacity collapsed, its oil production ceased, its transportation network failed. None of that would have been possible without March 4th, 1944, the day Mustangs reached Berlin, the day the laughter stopped, the day air superiority shifted permanently to the Allies. The men who flew those missions, in bombers and fighters alike, paid a terrible price for victory. Thousands died. Many more were wounded or captured. The survivors carried scars, physical and psychological, for the rest of their lives. But they succeeded. They completed a mission that seemed impossible. They changed the course of the war. And they did it in one of the most beautiful aircraft ever built, the North American P-51 Mustang, the fighter that won the air war over Europe.